Hello, I'm Rob Wright, Chief Editor of Life Science Leader. And as you can see, I'm still sporting my COVID-19 DIY haircut, or haircuts, should I say, at this point. Speaking of COVID-19, we've seen a lot of media attention and hype around what is going on with regard to treatments and vaccines and new tests being developed. So we thought it'd be really cool at Life Science Leader to bring together some CEOs whose companies are working diligently on the front lines to develop everything from new tests to vaccines to therapeutics. So let's quickly meet our panel, and then we will go into doing some direct questions. So starting with you, Brian, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi, Rob. I'm Brian Culley, and I'm the CEO of Lineage Cell Therapeutics.
Thanks. Peter.
Hi, Peter Diamandis. I'm a couple different hats as executive founder of the Singularity University and founder and executive chairman of XPRIZE. But here today, I'm serving as co-founder and vice chairman of COVAXX. And in that effect, I work for Mei Mei Hu, who's our CEO and co-founder here.
Mei Mei.
Yeah. As Peter said, I'm Mei Mei Hu. I'm the co-CEO and co-founder of COVAXX.
And finally, Jonathan.
I'm Jonathan Javitt, the CEO of NeuroRx.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for being here today. I wanted to get started with some direct questions. And I know, Peter, you mentioned that you're here today kind of representing COVAXX, but I think we'd be ignoring the pink elephant in the room if we didn't talk a little bit about a contest that you were kind of involved in, a competition around tests. Could you tell us a little bit about that before we start talking about COVAXX at the XPRIZE Foundation?
Sure. So in response to the pandemic, hopefully anybody who's been able to try and bring to bear their resources to address the pandemic, the XPRIZE Foundation, where I serve. I used to be CEO, an amazing woman, Anusha Ansari, is CEO there now. I serve as executive chairman. We developed a number of areas. First off, we have a next generation mask XPRIZE that Mark Benioff, the chairman, CEO of Salesforce, and Jim Cramer from television fame have co-funded Reinvent the Face Mask. We also, with the help of some incredible individuals, including Jeff Huber and Daniel Kraft, have an XPRIZE for rapid diagnostics. And this is really what's the next generation of PCR that is super cheap and super fast and super mobile to help us really identify super spreaders and identify people at place of work, school, worship, wherever it may be, to really help us stem the COVID-19 pandemic from spreading further. So that's an ongoing competition. What's amazing is we've had over 500 teams around the world register for this $5 million rapid diagnostic test in under 30 days.
You said it's ongoing, but I thought there was a date of when the prize was going to be awarded.
Yes, there is. I don't have the final date right now, but we're open in registration right now, and then it's going to be, we go from a registration phase to a competition phase to a finals phase.
Okay, great. So, all right, you got that going on that you're a little bit involved with, right? And then you decide, tell us a little bit about this, how COVAXX came about.
So I've had the pleasure of knowing two incredible CEOs, Mei Mei Hu and Lou Reese, who are the co-CEOs, and I've been on their board for a company, Vaccinity, and Mei Mei can go into the science there, but we're talking about synthetic peptide multi-tope vaccines and diagnostics. About 6 months ago, it's hard to remember, it's early March, Mei Mei calls me and says, listen, our technology had looked at the original SARS vaccine. I looked at the original SARS virus, SARS-CoV-1, if you would. What was it, 20 years ago? But it never broke out, and we think we could mount a vaccine and a diagnostic, a serology diagnostic rapidly. And I said, great, let's do it. And we ended up creating COVAXX in the first 30 days, 30 different vaccines. Ultimately, the lead vaccine right now, as Mei Mei can tell you all the details much better than I can, we're selecting patients for entering a phase 1 trial within the next 2 weeks. We made a big announcement today in Brazil, but I'm going to leave that stuff for Mei Mei to talk about. But it's
Okay.
Okay, Peter, there's enough to share.
Well, I did have a question because I know we are doing some things at unprecedented pace in regard to vaccine development. And when you talk about, like, I've interviewed a lot of CEOs and executives, so this question is kind of to Peter and Mei Mei. But I mean, to get a company up this quickly and have a pipeline that rapidly and to put people in place, I mean, I would imagine you're doing a variety of different things, probably outsourcing some things. Maybe you could tell us a little bit of how you do that so fast.
Mei Mei, secret sauce, because we talk about COVID. We talk about COVID speed, and I will say one thing and hand it over to Mei Mei, which is the entire leadership team has sort of been a capitalist commune. We've co-located and have been working together for the last 6 months, and it's been heads down 6 a.m. to midnight. I'm sure for many of the companies here, level of intensity and has been extraordinary.
Yeah, no, it's definitely on COVID time, which is essentially accelerating everything. You know, we're fortunate because we have a infrastructure from affiliate companies that we basically borrowed from. So we set up a new legal entity called COVAXX just to focus on COVID-19, put all the IP into that entity, but then we basically borrowed from teams and said, who wants to work on COVID-19? And I promise you, everyone was like, this is, you know, I want to be part of it. So we were fortunate that we have a platform, and that includes not just the technology, but also the infrastructure, the teams, the manufacturing, to be lent and to be re-resourced to tackle this. And so we've been doing things at unprecedented speeds, just like everyone else. But it's been really remarkable, and it's an honor to be working with folks side by side. And as Peter said, you know, we had the pleasure of actually having most of the executive team living together, you know, integrating together and working nonstop on it. I think this last week or two has been the first week since the whole pandemic started that we really haven't been co-located. But it's finding people who are willing to impassioned by the mission and, you know, basically dedicated to getting things done on an impossible timeline.
So Mei Mei, I'm just curious, when we talk about, so you're at your organization and you have this idea of where you can make a difference, because a lot of us have ideas and then we don't do anything about them. So what made you decide to pick up the phone to call Peter, and just tell me a little bit about you weighing this? I think we can do something, and how that came to fruition.
You know, everything just starts as an idea, and you just got to kind of see what gets traction. You know, to be honest, COVID's larger than anything we've ever seen before. So if you have an opportunity to get involved and you really believe you can make a difference, why wouldn't you make it happen, right? Everything else is on hold anyway. We're all people who like to get things done that help the world for a positive impact. So we couldn't think of a better mission. And then the question is just, are there other people who are like-minded? And so the first call we made was to Peter, because, you know, if you think of who in the world do you know that, you know, wants to make a positive impact and can share the bright outlook of the future with others, you know, he's the top of the list, not to mention he's a great friend. So that connection was easy, and you know, pulling together the resource and finding other people who were aligned with that mission was also easy, because, you know, at the time everyone wanted, figuring out how to structure it was a little more difficult. Yeah, that's, and once you're aligned, then you just run.
I was just saying, Mei Mei, I'm losing a little bit of audio, just making you aware of it.
Oh.
Just a little.
Okay.
It was kind of just right there near the end. So one quick follow-up question. So I know Peter had mentioned something about the science that was involved. And so The question is, what makes what COVAXX is doing a little bit different? Help us understand a little bit of the differentiation.
Yeah, well, I'm biased because I love our platform. It's a synthetic peptide vaccine platform that we've been developing, and we've actually been repurposing into humans over the last 6-8 years. We've run 4 clinical trials off of it, but this is a proven vaccine platform. First, it's completely synthetic, so there's no biohazard risk, right? We never touch the virus. We get the sequence, and like some of the newer technologies, we run off the sequence and we mimic the biology through a chemical process. But one of the differentiators and where we feel like we have a major advantage is this isn't theoretical, right? We've commercialized vaccines. Sure, it's for animal health indications, but they've been against infectious diseases, and everyone's going to face clinical risk. But where we can shine and move forward is we know how to manufacture, we know how to scale up. We don't require special, cold chain shipment at -80 degrees to deliver. So there are other risks that we managed to mitigate off of our platform because, we've done it before. Our parent company has done it before. And now Lou and I have the great fortune and privilege of repurposing it and redirecting it to COVID-19. So it's what it allows us to do is actually attack it in multiple ways. So we have a multi-tope approach. It's like, a lot of times you go after, everyone's going after the spike protein, which is a very rational target, right? That's where the virus attaches. So we want to neutralize that. But also there are other parts of the virus that the body responds to and that elicits, T-cell responses. So we're not just relying on one part of the puzzle. We're actually going multiple forms to make sure that we generate a broader immune response that activates both the B and the T-cell arms of the adaptive immune system so that we can, optimize our chances at getting something out there that's safe and efficacious. So it's all about mitigating risk that's unnecessary or that we can mitigate and increasing the probability of success when we do get out there.
Mei, let me ask just one follow-up question with regard to the trial status. So we've seen a lot of attention being paid to, Russia has something and other people are saying we can have something sooner than we thought and so forth. There's a lot of that. I'm just wondering, update on where you are as far as the clinical phase trials and.
Yeah, there's a lot of noise in the COVID space. And we're not worried about it. It's not a race to the clinic. It's a race to the patient at the end of the day. And not only that, but it's a race where many people can win. We're confident we'll have a very good, strong vaccine at the end of the day. And, we just filed and got approved for our IND in Taiwan. We just announced a partnership for a phase 2/3 efficacy trial in Brazil on the heels of that. And, we're about to dose. We're basically doing site prep and screening. And we're about to dose any day now. So we're well into our way onto the clinical adventure, and it is not the traditional development path, as probably everyone on this panel knows. So we're doing things on top of each other and in parallel, as opposed to serially. So everything is happening alongside each other, just so that we can basically put things and stagger them on the heels.
So Peter and Mei Mei, one of the questions I'm asking, I promised Jonathan, Brian, I'm coming to you, but I was curious when you talk about the location of these trials, is there anything being done to help facilitate harmonization maybe between countries so they're accepting data?
So, traditional drug development is often on a global basis, on a global integrated basis as well. So it's very important to be communicating with the regulatory agencies so that different data is accepted at others. So, we've had history of doing trials in Taiwan and then moving it to FDA IND. So I see that less of an issue. Really, it's COVID chasing, right? So there are logistics involved in running these trials, and so you want to go where the outbreaks are, you want to go where the patients are, you want to go where you can execute it. And as a result, we're not just betting on one location. So we have an integrated global development plan, but we're running trials in multiple geographies. One, out of practicality, and two, because different regulatory agencies, you're going to be essentially negotiating, communicating with each one. We want to be going after the big markets, and we may get approval in a different jurisdiction first, and that's okay. The goal is to get this out there to people once it's shown to be safe and effective as soon as possible.
And this is likely to be a long game. COVID-19 is not miraculously going to go away. It's going to enter our viral ecosystem and be something that we're going to have to deal with for some time, just like a variety of flus are. And one thing that I'll just mention, you know, my heart goes out to those who've been impacted economically and health-wise, but I think of COVID-19 as a practice pandemic. It could have been a lot worse in terms of mortality of this virus. And so we're becoming aware about how do we respond to, it's not the first nor the last pandemic that we're going to see. So how do we respond faster, better, more efficaciously in the future?
Thanks, Peter. I wanted to transition real quick to Jonathan Javitt of NeuroRx, because I'm curious, and I bet other people on the call are probably curious as well, Peter, about, like, Jonathan, how does a clinical stage small molecule company that's developing like CNS-oriented therapeutics get involved in treating respiratory failure in COVID-19? I just want to understand how that happens.
Well, you know, it's one of those extraordinary accidents, but some people say chance favors the prepared mind. And believe it or not, vasoactive intestinal peptide, which is the active ingredient we're working with, is a neuroendocrine peptide. And we were originally thinking about this in the CNS context. Then one of our investors came along and said, well, we have this company over in Switzerland that's been thinking about this from a COVID-19 perspective. And, you know, sure enough, it turns out that when Professor Sami Saeed, who spent his whole life developing this peptide, you know, really understood what it did, even though it was first identified in the intestine, which is why it has this funny name. 70% of the VIP in the body is in the lung. And it seems to have one critical function in the lung, which is to protect the type 2 alveolar cell. Most people have never heard of the type 2 alveolar cell. In fact, when I was in medical school, I don't even think we knew that there were type 1 and type 2 cells. But this rare cell, it's only about 5% of all the cells that line the lung, is the cell that is critical for the flow of oxygen from the air into the bloodstream. And it makes the surfactant that lines the lung. Without that surfactant, the lung can't transmit oxygen. And this funny virus, this virus that humanity's never really encountered before SARS came along, attacks that one cell. It's almost like hitting a needle in a haystack. And it attacks that one cell because that cell happens to have ACE2 receptors on its surface. So those funny spikes that you see on the virus, they bind right to that receptor. It's like a key fitting a lock, and the cell says, come on inside. And as soon as the virus is inside the cell, it starts to make millions of copies of itself. It starts to let inflammatory cytokines loose all over the body. It ruptures the cell and it shuts down surfactant production. So all of a sudden, people who don't even look that sick have no oxygen in the blood. They can't walk from their bed to the bathroom without falling down on the floor. And what we learned, what we expected, is that this would be a potent anti-cytokine. We thought it would do a great job of blocking cytokines and a great job of increasing surfactant production. And then lo and behold, a group of people we never heard of at the Oswaldo Cruz Institute in Rio de Janeiro reached out to us and said, you know that molecule you're working with? Here's the data that shows that it blocks the replication of the SARS virus in human lung cells. So it was a total holy cow moment for us. It was, now we see why we're seeing extraordinarily rapid recovery in the clinic. When we went into the clinic with this drug, and we literally went from paper files, because nobody had used this drug in humans for 10 years, from paper files to freshly formulated drug with a fresh FDA certificate of analysis in human beings in 10 weeks. When we went into the clinic, we expected to see an anti-inflammatory effect. We expected to see some of the same effects that Dr. Saeed saw in 2005 when he used this drug against acute respiratory distress syndrome caused by sepsis, where 7 out of 8 people walked out of the ICU alive when you would expect at least 5 of them to have died. What we didn't expect to see was chest x-rays clearing in 3 and 4 days. We didn't expect to see some of the early results we've reported where out of the first 21 patients treated outside our clinical trial, they were too sick to get into our clinical trial. 11 of those people have done very well, and 19 out of those 21 people have survived to 28 days, which is the cutoff that NIH generally uses, 28-day survival as a critical endpoint. So we've been very surprised by the magnitude of response we've seen in the open label studies, and now we're about a month away from the first unblinded look at the phase 3 randomized control data. So, we're wondering, are we seeing the world's biggest placebo effect, or are we really onto something?
I'll be interested in hearing what you find out. But Jonathan, I am curious when you were talking about that and how it came about. I mean, I know I talk to a lot of executives in the business world, and when they're talking about core competencies, what is our core? And when I think about what was kind of core to your company, and then of course I could see you saying, well, patients are core, but was there some internal struggle just with thinking about, hey, we're going to be pivoting here a little bit?
I think the thing that is core to our company is we're just not afraid of anything.
Yeah.
And we're especially not afraid to go to FDA and say, please help us break the rules. I mean, there was 10 weeks from paper files to drug in the clinic in patients. Well, that's never going to happen through traditional GMP manufacturing, through standing up a fill and finish manufacturer. Those people take 6 months just to get their machines tuned up. So we went to FDA and said, you've got this list of 50 formulating pharmacies that you say passed your inspection. These 50 tiny little pharmacies that you say are safe, you didn't shut them down, you actually certified them as formulating pharmacies. How about we make this drug in one of those formulating pharmacies? We're literally making this drug by hand in order to be able to get it into a phase 3 trial, overnight. And FDA was willing to help us break those rules, or at least willing to waive those rules, and recognize that if we're facing the worst public health crisis in the last 100 years, we've got to be willing to do things in new ways. Otherwise, we're just dinosaurs looking at that asteroid coming closer and closer.
I'm curious, Jonathan, about the formulating pharmacies idea. That's kind of just an interesting approach, and I'd imagine you're also trying to figure out how to do the scale up as you're doing it now and well in advance so things can continue to progress. Could you tell us a little bit about where the idea came about?
Well, we're not going to try that one twice. So we've actually just signed a contract with one of those fill and finish manufacturers that we're hoping to announce very shortly. And they are actually the largest manufacturer of sterile inhaled drug in the world. Although our clinical trial is with intravenous drug, we've already announced a trial that we intend to start quite shortly with an inhaled version of this drug for people not with critical COVID-19, not the people on ventilators who we're treating right now, but people with earlier stage disease in the hopes of keeping them from going onto ventilators.
Great.
So we started out in a very non-traditional way, and we're morphing as quickly as we possibly can to sort of rock solid traditional scale.
Brian, just tell us what you've been doing at Lineage, to tackle COVID-19.
Hey, Rob. Well, you, whether intentional or not, you've got 3 groups that have non-overlapping emphasis. And what I mean by that is that Jonathan, not to speak for him, but I think he's primarily concerned with the sickest of the sick patients. And I think Mei Mei and Peter are really concerned with things like cost and scale and a chain of custody and friendly temperatures. We're operating in a slightly different area. So we are focused on trying to provide a real, what I'll say, super vaccine. So what do I mean by that? Well, all vaccines have something in common, and that is that their job is to educate your immune system. So vaccines present foreign material to a person's immune system. And a lot of vaccines rely on different kinds of boosters or adjuvants and carriers and so forth. What we do is we rely on the body's natural cell to perform that job. So the body has a group of cells called dendritic cells, and they are nature's most potent antigen-presenting cells. So they were designed to pick up foreign material and present it to your immune system and basically educate or teach your immune system, hey, this is what foreign material looks like. Go eradicate it. Whether that foreign material comes from a cell that's lost its ability to control growth, meaning a tumor, or whether that foreign material comes from a bacteria or a virus. If it's foreign and you want to get rid of it, you have to educate the immune system. So we're harnessing the power of the dendritic cell to educate a patient's immune system. So we could put, for example, a spike protein from SARS-CoV-2 or other antigens, other foreign material. We can load those messages into dendritic cells and inject dendritic cells by the millions into patients, so that you're carrying, almost like the post office, you're carrying this most important information, but you're not relying on the Pony Express or a carrier pigeon. You're using the best system possible. And that's really what our total technology is based on, the ability to manufacture a specific kind of cell and expand those cells into the many millions, and then use those cells as treatment. And so deploying one of our programs into COVID is simply choosing a viral antigen as the messenger or the information which we're carrying, rather than a tumor antigen.
Got it. So where are you in the development process as far as trials and so forth?
Yeah, it seems like it should be a straightforward question, but almost all of us in the space are doing some kind of repurposing. It's almost impossible to come up with something completely from scratch. We're all relying on some component of our business and repurposing it or adapting it. And so in our case, we have a clinical trial running right now. It's actually the third in a series of clinical trials. It's not phase 3, but it's the third of a series of trials. And that is in a cancer setting. So we have a cancer antigen, which is being delivered by these dendritic cells. And what we can do, because that antigen is just a plug and play, we can manufacture, which is what we're doing right now, we can manufacture a different antigen cassette, call it, and drop that cassette into our dendritic cells and then move forward into clinical trials. One of the, I suppose, convenient things is that we've been able to get into clinical trials without having to do any of the traditional animal studies. That has to do with the nature of dendritic cells, their safety profile, and what happens if you put them into a different species. So we think that there's an opportunity here to move very quickly, but our vision is really more about what Peter referenced, which is we got lucky. This one could have been a lot worse, and there's no promise that the next one, the next pandemic that comes along, is going to be any easier. It could be more deadly, it could be more infectious, it could mutate at a faster rate. So our view is that there are patients out there for whom a really robust T-cell response. So we're not emphasizing the antibodies. That's the job of some other companies, the Pfizers and the AstraZenecas and others. We're really thinking about the T-cell response, because that's where you're going to get durable protection, multi-year protection. Nobody wants this pandemic or a future pandemic to be a seasonal problem. It starts to become incalculable, both on the economy and on the impact on human health. So we are focused on using the power of dendritic cells to get these very strong T cell responses, because that is where you get your multi-year protection from.
So
And
does,
I like
go ahead,
also,
Peter.
I was going to say, I like also the notion of Brian, your notion of a platform and a cassette, right? And I think a lot of where biology is going is platform plays. It's the same true for COVAXX in terms of using this synthetic peptide platform that you then put in the appropriate elements that focus your immune system towards the COVID-19. In this case, 6 different epitopes on the vaccine. But the ability for, I think, the ultimate thing that links all of the companies here is agility. The ability to take what you have and point it at a new enemy in a very agile fashion. And I think one of the key things is, how do we have the regulatory system allow for such agility to maximize, frankly, CEOs and entrepreneurs' willingness to take the eye off this ball and focus it on that opportunity when it's needed.
Which is a great question, because we've seen a lot of controversy. In fact, we saw an open letter, right, from 9 executives saying, hey, we're going to stand by the science, and we want the FDA making the approval based on science, not politics. But then when you see the FDA kind of shifting and adjusting to be able to accelerate development, you get the concern about politics maybe helping to manipulate. So how do we do that? That's just a
Well, I
anyway.
haven't seen any evidence that FDA is being less stringent with people. They're certainly not being less stringent with us. What they're doing is being a lot quicker at being stringent. So, meeting requests that used to take 60 and 90 days, all of a sudden take, 60 and 90 hours to be answered. And when you send them a question, they're turning around the answer in 48 hours. In 30 years of knowing the FDA, I've never seen anything like this. I've gotten emails from FDA scientists that they wrote and sent at 2 in the morning. So it's one thing to relax the standards, and it's another to step up and apply those standards as quickly as you possibly can for the benefit of humanity.
It's interesting when Mei Mei talked about kind of the team being sequestered, if you will, and working from like 6 a.m. till, very late at night. Obviously the FDA has to be doing the same thing, because I have been to at least 3 or 4 presentations back when we went to in-person meetings and presentations. I remember seeing Janet Woodcock's slide deck, and the number of vacancies at the FDA were consistent almost from year to year as how many gaps they had and wanting to fill those gaps, and yet we've seen them be able to accelerate. So they're really, I don't know if we're giving the FDA enough credit for, people are working pretty darn hard over there.
Well, part of what's changed things, and we really have Scott Gottlieb to thank for this, is the 21st Century Cures Act that was passed, I guess it's now 3.5 years ago. And then we had Scott come in as commissioner, being the first commissioner to really implement that act. And Congress finally gave the commissioner of the FDA the tools that were needed to attract the best and the brightest, which included some real salaries. All of a sudden, FDA is able to pay salaries that certainly are not at the top of industry scale. They're not paying anybody millions of dollars, but they're able to pay somebody enough of a salary to leave a major pharmaceutical company and take a job as a regulatory scientist approving drugs. And without that, the agency can't work.
Anybody with anything else to add? One of the other questions, go ahead, Mei Mei.
No, it's okay. I was saying, I think everyone's doing their best, and like many things, it's often a case-by-case basis on how it is. But I think overall, I would not like to be in the FDA shoes right now. There's a lot of major decisions coming up and a lot of pressures that take great strength to stay and high integrity, and there's a lot of in the balance, right? Usually Supreme Court hearings usually say you'll override a law in the interest of public health or in public interest. So I can't imagine a time where we have more of that riding on these decisions, and you're never going to please everyone. So it's not an enviable position. So I think we have to give them credit. They're doing their best. Everyone is actually. I mean, we work with Anvisa, we work with the Taiwan FDA and CDE. They are all working, overtime, overdrive, and trying to get things back as fast as they can. So, while there still are frustrations, it's natural, and we just hope that people have the strength to do what's right at the end of the day and let the data drive the decisions. So.
Mei Mei, I did want to come back to you and ask a question, because when you said there's no cold chain, and you were talking about the synthetic vaccine that you're working on, and you said no cold chain, I had to make a note of that, because that really, I've never heard a vaccine person really talk about that in human vaccines.
No special cold chain. No special cold chain.
Okay.
So we have cold chain. We use 2 to 8 degrees, but
Okay.
It's pretty standard for other vaccines. There's new technologies that require freezers or even colder at -80 degrees. And so that's talking about, transporting things with, liquid nitrogen. That makes it a bit harder, right? Especially if you're doing something to the masses. It's one thing if you're delivering packages or, packets here and there. But when you're talking about mass vaccination, this is a logistics challenge. And so now you're not only building the car, you're also building the road at the same time on which to drive it. So not impossible, just another.
Rob, if you've got just a couple minutes, I'd love to go back to something Brian said earlier.
Go ahead.
When he said, we're focusing on the patients with most severe disease. And it's certainly true that that's where we started, because those are the patients who are dying by the hundreds and thousands. But there really is a platform play that I think needs to be thought about by more people than just us. The whole story of this virus is its ability to enter very specific cells in the epithelium. It only enters those weird cells that have H2 surface receptors. And that's mostly a couple of cells in the nasal zone, because that's where the virus seems to get going. And then it goes down to the lung and it enters these alveolar type 2 cells. And if you can stop that process, then the SARS-CoV-2 virus is either asymptomatic or nothing more than a mild cold. And people are talking about grand platforms and systemic approaches and all of that. But in fact, this virus is doing us so much harm because it's figured out how to hit a needle in a haystack. And the more we can focus on that needle, the more we can focus on how does the virus get into that cell and how do we stop it in that cell. It may be that we'll never have a vaccine. I hope we do. But so far, as long as I've lived, we've never had a vaccine that's able to stop an RNA virus. And yet, similarly with pneumonia, we invented penicillin in the 1920s, and it was 65 or 70 years before we had a vaccine against pneumococcus. But we did a great job of keeping people from dying of pneumonia over those 70 years just because we were able to interdict the process. So, I truly hope we wind up with vaccines. I truly hope we wind up with sort of global immunologic approaches to this virus. But in fact, there are some very focused things we could be doing that we're not doing to deal with this particular family of viruses and their determination to eradicate the human race.
Peter, I wanted to come back to you with regard to, we talked about the testing, then we talked about vaccine development, and then we talked about some other means of delivery. And the question I had was, now we're talking about the next phase. Let's say we get an approved treatment and we're looking at trying to deliver that treatment. Have you given much thought to how we are going to cover it to get that going, with given all the limited number of people to be able to give it, and how are we going to give it delivered?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. In fact, we had a conversation at XPRIZE about a vaccine delivery competition, right? And once you have an effective treatment, how do you distribute it to seemingly 8 billion people? And you know, the current vaccine mechanisms are out there, right? There are mechanisms by which the majority of the world is vaccinated, and we can go through, at least the United States, go through a Walgreens, go through a CVS, and so forth. But what is the future once there is a vaccination or an alternate treatment found? Is there a mechanism that makes it super easy? I remember, I'm looking around the room, I think we're kind of all old enough to remember the early days of AOL, maybe not Mei Mei, but I remember AOL, America Online, used to send out these CD-ROMs, these DVDs in the mail, and then you get 20 of them, and they were given out for free, and you get one and you'd sign up. So ultimately, is there a mechanism by which you literally get the vaccine or the therapeutic in the mail and you inject yourself? I mean, remember, the day before something is truly a breakthrough, it's a crazy idea. And the crazy ideas here are everything from little micro drones flying around to give you the therapeutic, to engineering mosquitoes to go around and distribute the therapeutic. But ultimately, it's how do you do this? It's fine in the first world, but how do you do this in the developing world where people don't know they need it or don't have access to it? And how do you make that happen cost effectively, efficiently? So yes, the distribution part of the equation, once there is treatments, and again, it's not just for this pandemic, it's for all future ones. How do you make it easy and fast?
Right, and one of the things I've heard is that this vaccine, depending upon which one you're getting given, can be pretty painful. And I was talking to a friend about that, and he said, my wife and I just got the shingles vaccine, and I was pointing out to him, like, if one requires a booster dose, which his shingles vaccine did, he said the first one was painful, and he got pretty sick, and it really makes you think, do you want to go back for that booster shot? So I think that's another hurdle we're looking at as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mei Mei can speak to the platform that COVAXX is using. Has been used in parts of Asia in the most rural area for delivering 5 billion doses of vaccines to farmers where there's zero infrastructure. So it can be done, and done safely and done at scale. Mei Mei, do you want to address any of that?
Yeah, I think, to your questions, Rob, on the delivery standpoint, one of the benefits is we don't require any new infrastructure. I think 80% of the world today is vaccinated, so there is some infrastructure, even, particularly in the developing world, that's able to get vaccines there. And so that's something that we can leverage on an existing basis. But to your second question, you're absolutely right that some of these can be painful, and that's the the reactogenicity of some of these vaccines, in particular their adjuvants. Our immune system is a beautiful weapon against disease, but we have yet to conquer and fully figure out. So some approaches are just stimulate, right? You got to stimulate it through particularly adjuvants, and sometimes that's painful. We just on a company basis use a very standard adjuvant called Agifos, which is rather benign, and we rely on our technology and of designing how the immunogens are, but it's always a cost benefit, right? Some of them may have to have this painful thing to work, and we'll just see how many people opt for it. But that's something that it's hard to predict, because if you do, I know it's going to be wrong. So There are lots of considerations, Rob. That's why it's not a winner-take-all race, right? There's going to be different vaccines that work better in different populations. Some may work better for the elderly. Some may, work better in pediatric situations. You don't want something, you want something milder in those. Some, may just not be available in the developing world because of logistical challenges. So I think there are going to be lots of niches and lots of room for multiple players for different purposes and populations to serve.
Well, I, for one, am advocating for an XPRIZE for someone figuring out how to make temperature-stable vaccines so you need zero cold chain. I think that would be a remarkable breakthrough. That's probably just as crazy an idea as Peter was throwing out there. But like you said, you got to nurture the idea along. So one of the things, we're kind of getting towards the end of the call, and what I often like to do on these virtual CEO roundtables is offer the opportunity for each of the panelists to share a parting thought. And it can be anything. It could be something about wearing masks, or something that, a parting pearl of wisdom, something that they've gained from this experience of joining a vaccine company, and getting things up and running so quickly. So why don't we start alphabetically, back with Brian, opportunity for you to offer a parting pearl for us today.
Well, sure, Rob. I think one of the things that you heard today is, if there's a will or an incentive, things can get done. We've done a wonderful job fighting malaria because we figured out how to get a very powerful drug called artemisinin out into Southeast Asia and out into Africa. You have to have an incentive to get things done, and that's what business is all about, identifying problems and trying to come up with solutions. Immunology, speaking as a retired immunologist of sorts, immunology is one of the most complex areas. And you also have to consider the social science that goes along. We sit here and we model the infectivity rate across a population, but how do you model people getting tired of being told to socially distance, right? There's no predicate for that. So the complexity, it just becomes absurd. So what we really need are a lot of people working on many different approaches simultaneously. We as business managers need to block out the noise from the critics, because no one has the predictive power to know exactly what's going to work, although many people claim to know. At the end of the day, we all have to try and test. And then ultimately, we are going to find the kinds of solutions that work in the right pockets, and we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay against the next pandemic and the one after that as well. But there's going to be a lot of, pain and a lot of effort that comes first. But that's all right. That's what a lot of us and our staff are really trying to push forward.
Thanks, Brian. Peter, you have a parting pearl for us today?
Yeah, two brief ones. First of all, I just harken back to March, April, at the beginning of when the pandemic was just beginning to build and momentum and so forth, and all hope was lost. We forget that in the early days of a response, the response is deceptively low. People are gathering, ideas are coming, capital is beginning to flow, teams are coming together. And then all of a sudden you start hearing about not one vaccine, but not two vaccines, but 100 vaccines and 200 vaccines and 200 therapeutics. And so there is a tsunami of solutions that end up coming to a problem that's this big that you don't see in the beginning. It's the tide going out. The second thing is, if you're lucky enough, and I say this from the heart, if you're lucky enough in your life to get involved in something as meaningful as going after a solution to COVID-19, because this is a once in a lifetime, make sure you partner with people you love, because you spend a lot of time with them. And it's serious, don't hang out with assholes, to be blunt. Hang out with people who you truly care for and love. It makes the journey a lot more enjoyable.
I appreciate the wisdom, Peter. Mei Mei, how about your parting pearl?
This is the COVID-19 is probably one of the most devastating social events of my lifetime, of the decade, of the century. But it's also an unbelievable blessing and opportunity, and I've seen more beautiful things come out of this time, from friendships to opportunity to, opportunities for gratitude and collaborations that we've never seen before, levels of collaboration between competitors that were unimaginable previously. And so, in other words, in every darkness, there is beautiful light, and at the end of the day, light wins out. So there's so much to be optimistic for, and it's an honor to be part of the journey to bring that out.
And finally, Jonathan.
I think the most important thing is not to be afraid to break the rules. The pharmaceutical industry is very tradition-bound. People know that you're supposed to do things a certain way, and that's good, because by and large it's kept the American pharmaceutical industry from having some of the crises that other pharmaceutical industries around the world haven't had. But this is a time where we have to break the rules. I once watched a major pharmaceutical company lose $2 billion of revenue that their shareholders would have enjoyed having, because the person, and it was only one person, responsible for making clinical trial supplies couldn't figure out how to make clinical trial supplies for an existing drug, a 15-year-old drug, within 24 months in order to satisfy the FDA's request for a pediatric trial that would have given them a 6-month patent extension. Because making boxes of clinical trial supplies for 150 people was just too much work. If we don't break the rules, and if we don't break the rules consciously every day, we're going to lose many more people to this pandemic than we need to.
Well, thanks, Jonathan. And I want to thank everyone for making the time to participate in today's call and providing their perspective during these unprecedented times. We hope everyone finds this information useful. We encourage you to become subscribers to Life Science Leader, which you can do at www.lifescienceleader.com. Look for the subscribe button. I'm Rob Wright. Thanks for watching, reading, and most importantly, for contributing. Thanks, everyone.